Welcome to today's game. We're doing another hypothetical scenario. This is a situation that I'm playing from a scenario I found up on the web, actually done by some American gaming colleagues. It was on the Mad Max Attic blog, and it speculates that it is 11:30 on the 15th of June. And outside the small village of Gosselies, which is just north of the Sambre River at Charleroi. And the Brunswick contingent of the Duke of Brunswick himself, Frederick William, has been tasked with the defence of this important town. He's supported by the 3rd Netherlands Infantry Division under General Chassé, who is in the rear and is marching to the sound of the guns. The Brunswick troops are on the tabletop and are deploying in support of the village of Gosselies, which is represented by this building in the centre of the table. That counts as 2 built-up areas. And they are going to be fighting against elements of Rise 2nd Corps. Now the actual scenario swaps Rise 2nd Corps for Durnall's 1st Corps, but given I have all of Rise troops, we'll be using those. So for the Brunswickers already on the table, we have 3 battalions of line infantry. So these will be counting as reservists, which means for their first 4 casualties, they operate as normal line troops, and then they'll drop down to conscript status once they've started taking casualties. And they're supported by a line foot artillery battery here on this hill. Then as we move across into the centre, into Gosselies itself, we have the, I think these are the first light, with the white stripes on their trousers. This is the second light, and have they got yellow stripes on their trousers? And then the third light is just outside the village in support, and they've got red stripes on their trousers. So those 3 light battalions of Brunswickers are in the light brigade, and they've got their own independent command. And in the centre here we've got the Brunswick Commander-in-Chief, that's Prince William himself. Prince Frederick William himself in that command stand. And then also we have the Brunswick Hussars, a large regiment which will fight in 2, or might fight in 2 wings. We'll see how we go. And the good old Brunswick all hands as well. And then hiding away in these woods, we have a couple of companies of the Avant-Garde Battalion and some skirmishers against the hill line here. And we've also committed a couple of battalions of the Avant-Garde, and I'll be using the light grey ones as the rifled armed troops. I can't remember which had the rifles and which had the muskets, but we'll use the light grey ones as the rifle armed troops today. Alright, so that's the deployment of the Brunswickers. They'll be aiming to hold off the French from breaking through and capturing this town, and advancing off the table across this exit point here, this exit point here, and there is a 3rd exit point there. So if we can retain those 3 exit points and the built-up area, that'll give 5 victory points for the Brunswickers. The French obtain the same number by capturing those points. Right, so the French will be deploying 2 divisions and a light cavalry division against the combination of Brunswickers and Dutch Belgians. Both sides will bring on reserves with increasing likelihood as the game progresses. Alright, we'll start with turn 1, and we'll automatically give the French initiative as the Brunswicks are already deployed, and the French will start turn 1 by moving onto the table. Alright, here we are in turn 1, and the French have deployed onto the table. So the first of the French light cavalry, the 6th and the 1st Chasseurs à Cheval, have moved on the right flank up this road from Charleroi towards the Brunswick positions on this small hill, where the 1st of their line brigade is deployed. So the 1st Chasseurs have the German-style helmets, and the 6th Chasseurs are a large regiment. Indeed, both of these are large regiments, being 8 bases strong. And then on the second road north from Charleroi, approaching the village of Gosselies, we have the 5th and 6th Lancers. So these ones are, again, all the figures today will be pretty much Paris. Here we go. As you all know, my favourite troops, my French Lancers. They are moving forward to oppose the Brunswick cavalry, which is holding the right-hand end of the Brunswick line. All right, that's it for movement on turn 1, as we deemed that the Brunswickers deployed this turn and the French are just moving on the table. So we will get some firing. The Brunswickers, I will allow them to pull that skirmish screen back that's sitting in front of those guns there, as they can't fire at cavalry, as the cavalry are in the open. But we will see some firing from that Prussian Brunswick artillery battery on the hill. All right, we'll kick off the game with the first piece of firing. All right, so the Brunswick avant-garde have withdrawn into this small piece of woodland here. They would be able to fire, but they are currently out of range. But the Brunswick foot artillery is at effective range, and it will open fire from this hill against the approaching French cavalry. They are at effective range, so let's see how this shot does. Reroll a 5, that will be not very much. Effective range, that's just 1 casualty on the French Lancers, and that'll be it for turn 1. And we'll move on, rolling for ADCs on turn 2. And from turn 2 onwards, the French and the Brunswickers get to roll for reserves. You simply have to roll and less than the turn number to bring reserves onto the table. All right, so turn 2, we'll need 1s to bring on reserves. So this will be for the Dutch Belgians first, for the Brunswickers. Their reserves are not available. And for the French, well, both French infantry divisions are available to deploy. That'll be tough on the Brunswickers. Let's see how we get on, rolling for ADCs in turn 2. All right, so the French are deploying as a corps, whereas we have 2 independent divisions in the Allied side. This will give an advantage to the French because they get a bonus ADC for having their corps commander on, Rye. So they will be rolling for 7 ADCs. They managed to get 5 ADCs available, and they activated all of their brigades and put a forwards order on the first of their infantry divisions to move onto the table, or brigades to move onto the table, and that has indeed gone off. However, the chasseurs down here have gone hesitant. Perhaps it was the artillery fire from the Brunswickers. And the Brunswickers, unfortunately, only get 3 ADCs because they only have 3 brigades on the table, and the Dutch Belgians are not available yet. And unfortunately for them, both their infantry brigades went hesitant. So we'll roll for initiative. The French get a bonus of 1. So that's not sufficient. The Brunswickers do have initiative and can charge first as we look at turn 2. So being aggressive and not wanting to be charged themselves, the Brunswickers have charged to try and drive the Lancers off the table before they have a chance to bring the weight of numbers onto their side. So the Brunswick Hussars have charged this unit of Lancers. This unit of Lancers automatically brings this one in support, and the Hussars also brought the small regiment of all hands up in support for them as well. So we'll have to do the charge resolution for this combat. No other units are able to charge on the table. So let's move on and do charge resolution down here. Okay, so this will be a straight roll-off. Both sides have got a unit in support. Both sides have thrown their commanders in. Otherwise, both are line cavalry. Both are on campaign cavalry mounts, so they're not battle cavalry. So neither side will get a benefit for that. And the lances only count as a benefit in hand-to-hand combat. So let's roll this off. Straight roll-off between the French and the Brunswickers. All right, Brunswickers do quite well. They roll a 7, the French roll a 3, so the Brunswickers are won by 4. So they will melee with the Lan, and the Lancers will melee unformed. Right, let's roll off for this. Small advantage for the Brunswickers. The Lancers get an advantage because they're indeed using Lances. Brunswickers get an advantage for being a large unit, and the Brunswickers have a LAN, and the French are unformed. So let's see how we do. Well, looks pretty good for the Brunswickers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 casualties for the Brunswickers. Only 2 for the French. So the Brunswickers have won this combat, and they've won it by 3. So the French Lancers rout off the table, and the Brunswickers have captured this position. Okay, so great result for the Brunswickers. They've driven off that French Lancer Brigade. Now the routing unit that's gone off table, I deem that they can't come back. The other supporting unit, as it wasn't engaged in the melee, because it didn't get drawn into a second round of combat, simply has to step back. So they have stepped back off the table. They can come back on next turn, but their brigade will have to take a full to test. So we'll see whether they are available for the French later in the game. But a dramatically good turn events for the Brunswickers, looking good, but it's only turn 2, there's a long way to go. Right, let's move on with initiative in turn 3. Okay, so clearly the swift advance of the Brunswicker cavalry has unnerved them, and now they're deep in the French line. So they've gone hesitant and have to fall back. That's not necessarily a bad thing for them this turn. The other Brunswick brigade in the village is hesitant. This one on the right flank is active. All the Dutch Belgians are active, so can start coming off on the table. For the French, unfortunately, their leading 2 infantry brigades are both hesitant, clearly having been unnerved by the loss of their cavalry. The French light cavalry down here is active, and now let's roll. Whoa, Savoir qui peut for the cavalry brigade, and a 4, which we will check, but I think that will be an obey orders, so the French Lancers can come back in a subsequent turn. I will just, indeed, it's a rally result, so hesitant units, retreating or routed units disperse, which indeed they had done, but that French Lancer unit is available, as is its brigade, later in the game. Alright, now charges, and we'll roll for initiative, -2 for both sides, so it'll be a straight roll off. Let's see how we do. Again, the Brunswickers do well, they roll a 9. And the French roll a 7. So the Brunswickers have initiative. Their choice to declare charges. I don't think they will, because it will be on with normal. Okay, so no charges from the Dutch. And the Brunswickers this turn simply pulled the Brunswick cavalry back. But we did have a charge here, which we need to work out the results for. So the first chasseurs have gone against the Brunswicker gun line. So the Brunswicker guns will open fire at close range. They roll a 6, which close range will do something, but won't probably stop that charge. Close range of 6 is 2 more casualties against the cavalry, and this will be a charge result at -2. So they lose 1 for the 2 casualties inflicted on them this turn, and for having 4 cumulative casualties. I think that'll be the only modifier. We'll check that, but this should be +2 for the Brunswickers. The French roll a 10, the Brunswickers roll a 9. Right, we'll just check the other modifiers, see where that leaves us. Alright, at the end of the turn 3, the Brunswick artillery did its job and caused enough casualties to cause this chasseur regiment to recoil. The other chasseur regiment is threatening the Brunswicker lines there, and the Brunswickers haven't actually moved, so I will move those Brunswickers and they will take the opportunity to form square. Crossing the centre, so another French brigade has started appearing on the table here, but is threatened by those Brunswick cavalry, which have pulled back. And over on the far side of the table line, the Nassau have arrived to support the Dutch-Belgian position, and you can see some of the Brunswickers are starting to move off to their right to reinforce the centre as the Dutch-Belgians take over the defence of this right flank, screened at the moment by this Brunswicker cavalry, so the French can't interfere. Alright, that's it for turn 3. Let's move on with turn 4. Alright, in turn 4 the Brunswickers have initiative again. Brunswickers, allies and including Dutch Belgians have initiative, and all their brigades are active. For the French, all their on-table brigades are active, but the off-table brigade, the remaining one, is hesitant this turn. Alright, that's it, so it'll be charges first for the Brunswickers. Right, so the only charge in turn 4 is the Brunswick cavalry, again having a go, being supported by its lancers, having a go at smashing this French brigade that's just appearing on the table. So the battalion they have charge unknown to them is the only veteran on the table, but all the other battalions in this brigade are grenadier status, at least for the French. So let's see how they do as we declare this charge against this column. They were too close because the column had moved up as it's trying to force the pace. So they were less than 9 inches, so the column itself does not have a chance to form square. So this could be brutal. Let's see how we do as the Brunswickers charge. French column. Okay, so first we'll open fire with this column. It hasn't yet moved on this turn, so this will be a superior volley rather than an inferior volley. That battalion being veterans, but it will be at half effect as they're in column. We roll a 7. For a superior volley is 3 casualties. That's reduced to half effect, so that's 1 casualty on the Brunswickers. That won't cause any effect on the charge. Okay, so now let's roll the charge results. It'll be +3 to the French as basically they're in column and veterans. Alright, the French roll an 8, the Brunswickers roll a 7. The Brunswickers do have a reroll, which they will elect to take. They roll an 8 against an 8. +3 makes that an 11. So it's a -3 result at worst for the French before we decide whether to do a reroll. So cavalry versus infantry, the cavalry will retire. So I think the French will stick with that, and the cavalry retire with a further casualty. Okay, so the Brunswickers pull back. Okay, so some space opened up. The French have driven the Brunswickers off, so the Brunswickers retire, and we get on with normal movement in turn 4. Alright, let's do a recap of where we are at the end of turn 4 movement. So we've got the 28th Dutch-Belgian Orange Nassau Regiment, who were equipped predominantly in French-style uniforms, moving onto the table on the far right flank, and they're supported by this regiment of Dutch-Belgian Hussars. Over here to the right of Gosselies and the village, the Nassau have now arrived, and they're forming a line along this hedge line to the rear of the Brunswick cavalry, which retired in the face of bouncing off those French columns. If we look over here, we've got the French left-hand division now committed to the table, a brigade of 2 and a brigade of 4 battalions, and their artillery moving up potentially to take position on this hill, which will be quite threatening, and they're now supported by the lancers that had previously left the table. As we move across, we can see some Brunswickers moving in to deploy into Papillote. They were the battalion that was just to the right there, and the battalion that was in Papillote is deployed out to the rear of the building to provide support. Here, this French brigade is stymied, given they were charged by the cavalry this turn, so they haven't moved forward. But the complementary brigade here has moved on to the table. It's got its engineers, haven't yet attached them to one of the battalions, but probably will attach them to the battalion they're next to help with the assault on the village. Again, more French artillery coming onto the table and a nicely positioned hill for them to occupy. And we have the horse artillery that moved up onto the hill last turn behind these chasseurs. They've now unlimbered, and the chasseurs have reformed off the hill to allow the gun crew a clear field of fire. Might even choose to fire this turn despite unlimbering, given the attractiveness of those Brunswick squares. And over here, we're still trying to pin the rest of the Brunswick position with our chasseurs. Right, so it'll be Brunswickers and allies to fire first. Let's see how they do with their artillery, once again at effective range against these chasseurs. Okay, so rolling for the artillery. That's a good result, 10. That will not go down well on the chasseurs. So 10 at effective range is 3 casualties and a discipline test. That takes this brigade up to 8 casualties. And this discipline test will be at -2. They roll an 8, that goes down to a 6. They go unformed. Alright, now opening fire with our horse artillery on the hill here. And they unlimbered this turn, so this will be a shot at -2, but they do get 2 extra combat dice for firing at a square. So they're going at this Brunswicker square at effective range. It's a pretty good roll. So a 9 becomes a 7, and they have caused an extra casualty. So at effective range, that's 1, so that's 2 casualties on that Brunswicker square. Not devastating, but the start of softening them up. Okay, so turn 5, and the Dutch Belgians have moved their hussars up to flank the Orange Nassau battalions to try and stall this French attack on the left. These battalions themselves have moved forward, shuffled slightly, but they're feeling a bit compressed by the defensive positions. But we have moved 2 battalions up onto this hill. Haven't moved the artillery forward because we felt vulnerable to a counter-charge by these Brunswick Lancers. The Brunswick Lancers and hussars have moved forward off the immediate frontage of Gosselies, and again are threatening this part of the French line, which hasn't advanced as a result. In the centre here, however, the French columns have continued to move forward. I think I might reposition these 2 slightly. They did move second, and I want to make sure I don't expose my flank to a charge by the hussars, so we'll just change the angle slightly so they don't have their flanks exposed. But this brigade is moving up onto the hill, ready to threaten the farm. Second artillery battery is now up on the hill. But over here, the Brunswickers have stymied the French. I've pulled back this chasseur brigade. It's now on 9 casualties, because another round of firing by those guns could have been bad news for it. So we can still cause pressure with this large chasseur brigade here, but we'll see how this plays out on the right flank. Okay, so that's the end of movement. It'll now be firing Brunswickers and Dutch Belgians to go first. Alright, so there have been various exchanges of skirmish so far, no major effect on either side, although we have lost 1 base of Brunswicker skirmishers. They're light companies from the avant-garde battalion that are skirmishing in front of the village. We lost 1 of those bases. This battery has really nothing in its fire arc. It will fire probably at these guys at long range. So let's see how those Brunswickers do at long range. The target will be in cover. That's pretty good. That's a 10 at long range. -1 is 1 casualty in a discipline test. So let's see how these chasseurs do. It is a large brigade, so 4 goes down to a 2. That is a retreat result. We lose this chasseur brigade off table. Won't be a falter test, but another loss for the French. Good shooting again by the Brunswickers. Alright, I'll remove those in a second, and we'll now do our fire at effective range again with our French horse artillery battery going against the same Brunswick square, threatened by these chasseurs. Double 1, not good. They are low on ammunition, and no effect from that firing this turn, and a fatigue casualty as well. Mixed fortunes. Great for the Brunswickers, not so great for the French. Okay, in turn 6, great news for the Allies and Brunswickers. They're all active, all brigades. For the French, these 2 brigades here on the left-hand flank are clearly struggling to get orders. They're finding the Allied position difficult to disentangle, and they've both gone hesitant. Down here, this brigade has gone active, but this brigade that was in a position to assault, that one has also gone active. So those 2 central French brigades are active, but the French horse artillery, which went on artillery assault with a re-roll to try and attack these Brunswick squares, did go hesitant. So it can still fire, but no artillery assault this turn. So there we go. Let's see what we do with Allies moving first, charges in turn 6. Okay, so quite an eventful movement in turn 6. So the Brunswickers here, their allies are content. They've pinned the French, and given this brigade was hesitant, it's taken the opportunity to form those 3 units into square. The hussars have remained threatening, and the Orange Nassau are just in reserve behind them. This position is stable but not going anywhere forward. The Dutch Belgians remain lining that hedge line and content with their position over here. The Brunswick cavalry, as we know, did charge. The 2 French battalions in column have been able to form square, so it's unlikely the Brunswickers will do anything when we do the charge results on that, which we'll do in a second. Over here in the centre, the French have charged against the built-up area to 2 battalions attacking on the right, 3 battalions attacking on the left. Only 1 battalion could go in on the first round of combat. They took defensive fire from the garrisons, and both the attacking battalions took 1 casualty each. Over here, no real movement has happened. All right, so let's do the charge responses down here. There'll be no defensive fire, as both columns that were attacked chose to form square. So let's do the charge results. All right, let's do the artillery exchanges again down here. So the Brunswicker battery has pivoted, so it'll be -2, but it has been able to bring into its arc of fire at close range this chasseur unit. Wow, that's a 10. That goes down to an 8 at close range. That's 2 casualties on these chasseurs. They're up to 6 casualties now. All right, and now the French horse artillery battery will open fire again, 3rd time against this square at effective range. Again, not a great dice roll. They simply roll a 6. At effective range is 1 more casualty against the square. That's the end of firing. Again, a few skirmishers, 1 or 2 skirmisher bases exchanged, but we now get on to the crunch of the turn as the French try and assault the village of Gosselies. Right, first round of combat, and we'll go in. Charges automatically go home against built-up areas. The Brunswickers will get 5 dice for defending the built-up area, and the French lose 1 for assaulting those walls. So let's see how we do. French get 4 dice, Brunswickers get 5. So not a great roll by the French. In fact, a terrible roll by the French, and not much better by the Brunswickers, but good enough. They win by 2. That'll push that attacking French column. Right, and against the second built-up area, it'll be the same. 5 dice to the Brunswickers, 4 to the French. French do better this time. They roll 3 casualties, as do the Brunswickers. We'll get a right fight, a second round of combat, if both sides are up for it. Okay, so we've got a chance here for the French, with their sheer mass of attacking troops, to swing this one. So the Brunswickers still get 5 dice for the battalion in the village, because it's only taken 3 casualties. And there is a battalion, you might just see the end of down there, that's available to reinforce the village. So the Brunswickers get 10 dice, but the French can throw in all 3 battalions here. One of them will be on 4 dice, but the other 2 are still full strength. So let's see how the Brunswickers do to start with. Brunswickers do pretty well. They get 4 casualties against the French. Let's see how the French do. There are 2 black dice in this hand. Wow, they've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 casualties caused by the French. The French win by 4, and they eject the Brunswickers from that part of Gosselies. Okay, dramatic stuff. So still stalemate on the left-hand side of the table. The Brunswick cavalry dominating the centre, but the left-hand portion of the village has fallen to that French assault. We do still have a complete Dutch-Belgian brigade in reserve, so we'll throw that in to counter-attack against the village next turn. See how we do. Of course, the Brunswickers still hold the right-hand side of the village. So we'll see what happens as we move on to turn 7 in this battle. All right, so the Brunswickers here are disordered, hesitant rather, as a result of hearing the collapse of their position in the centre of the village. They've got a falter test for this light battalion that's still holding Gosselies. It's part of a broken brigade now. The other 2 battalions have routed off table and won't be coming back, but the brigade also might go. We have a re-roll. See what we do. Well, that's a 5. So that's obey orders, so they will keep fighting within that village. Otherwise, all other Brunswicker brigades are active, and we'll now just roll for the French. So we have 7 ADCs for the French. We've only actually got 3 active this turn. So we will go for... you do want to go for artillery assault. Now we're going to go for re-rolls. We're going to go for re-rolls for this brigade attacking in the centre, and we'll go for a reroll for... Oh, I will put artillery assault on my horse artillery. So my attacking French brigade does need its reroll. It goes active. My horse artillery, again, despite having another go, although a risky go at artillery assault, that doesn't come off. So the horse artillery and cavalry brigade is hesitant. My left-hand brigade on the left is hesitant. My left-hand brigade in the centre is active, and my cavalry is hesitant. So that's -2, -3 for the French, -1 for the Brunswickers. The Brunswickers, again, get initiative. I think actually it's turn 8, is what my little marker says, not turn 7. So charges for the Brunswickers first. Okay, so these French brigades, battalions have remained in square. However, we've now started pushing through these woods because we're safe from being charged by the cavalry towards the Nassau lines. The 2 French battalions that were behind this hedge line and their own skirmishers have driven up through the skirmish. Opposing Nassau skirmish line have pulled back, as have the Brunswick skirmishers, and their own skirmishers have moved forward. Down here, the good old Brunswick Hussars are now threatening the flank of this French position that's threatening the villages. So one of the battalions has formed square, and they may be able to charge next turn. Down here, it's only a small unit of all hands, so these battalions have decided to get on with it. So they've all formed into columns, so they should be able to move forward next turn. Down here, these units have reformed, and the French artillery will open fire again. But first, we'll start with the Brunswickers and their artillery battery against these chasseurs at close range. It's not so bad, that's only a 7 this time. So a 7 at close range is 2 casualties in a discipline test against these chasseurs. They are going to have to pull back shortly, but they are keeping this flank open. They roll a 7 at -2, so they go unformed. All right, next we will fire this French horse artillery battery again against the squares. I seem to remember this happened in our last game. French horse artillery couldn't break the squares, but better this time. So 2 extra casualty dice and a 9. That's at effective range. A 9, so that will be 4 casualties and a discipline test against the square. The square will have taken 7 now. So it goes shaken. There may be an opportunity to be charged by the cavalry next turn. And finally for this turn, the French artillery battery on the hill will open up against the Brunswick Hussars, who are in column, so there'll be an extra casualty dice for this, I think. If that's at effective range, it looks more like long range. We'll roll it anyway, but we'll check the range. A 7, and we didn't get a bonus casualty, so that's academic, and I'm sure that's at long range. It does convert from half a casualty to 1 casualty against the Hussars. All right, so here we are on turn 10, I think. And the Brunswickers have got artillery assault off against their gun battery on the hill, as have the French horse artillery. All other brigades on both sides are active, so it will be a straight roll-off for initiative as we start turn 10. The French get 7, the Brunswickers get 7, so that's a draw, and the Brunswickers had it last turn, so the Brunswickers retain initiative. They get the chance to charge. Will they have a go with those Hussars again? Of course, there have been charges in turn 10. How at the Nassau remain content, tying up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 French battalions, possibly 7, 8, 9 French battalions, because there's still some French reserve off table that haven't been able to get on here because of the pressure of the Brunswicker cavalry and the Nassau. So the 4 Nassau battalions and the 3 regiments of Allied cavalry are pleased with the deadlock on this side of the table. So they've stayed where they are. The Elhands have charged this column. So the column was not more than 9 inches away, so it does not get a chance to form square, so it takes it as a column. Down here, then the Brunswick Hussars have charged. Now they are going across the face of that other French square, so they will get passing fire. They roll a double 1, they lose fire discipline, but no other effect on the French. All right, they will then charge over that wall, brush the skirmishers away, who will lose a base as a result of that. And then this column gets a chance to form square, which it will try to do. It is Grenadiers. It goes unformed, so Hussars might have a chance. Let's see what happens as they charge into this column. Okay, this would be a straight roll-off. The column will get +2 for being in column, but -2 for being unformed. Actually, the Brunswickers have taken 5 casualties now, so it will be at +1 to the French. But if they lose this, the Hussars will trash that column and charge on. Let's see how they do. It's a 7 against a 5. They beat the column by 2, but they don't have the general in that combat. Let's see what that gives. Okay, so the Brunswick cavalry will melee with the land, and those French infantry will be unformed. All right, let's do the charge result down here. Again, a similar effect. It'll be at +1 to the French here, because they are in column, they are formed, so that gives them a +2 bonus, but the Lancers knock that down by 1. They do better this time. They roll a 7. Brunswickers roll a 6. The Brunswickers will not charge home. Okay, firing artillery assault with the Brunswickers against the chasseurs at close range. That was a 7 and 1 extra casualty. So 7 at close range is 2 casualties. That's 3 casualties in a discipline test. So this will be a discipline test at -3. On 13 casualties now. They're a large unit, so they can take 50. 876. So they go unformed again, so not great for them. They do need to retire next turn, and then the French will return the favour, firing their artillery assault at the Brunswick square. A 7 with an extra casualty at effective range is 2 more casualties, but no discipline test against the square. All right, so first off, we'll now do the assault by the Dutch Belgians against the hamlet of Gosselies. So the French defenders get 4 dice. They lose 1 for being unformed, but they will gain 1 up to 5 because they've got engineers deployed with them. That's one of my house rules. The Dutch will attack with 4 dice. So let's see whether the French can hold them off in this first round of combat. French do 2 casualties, the Dutch do 1, so I think that may go on to a second round of combat. Let's have a look. Built up area combat, win by 1, we fight on. All right, let's see what happens in the second round. We will fight on, but this looks good for the Dutch Belgians. They've got 3 battalions that it can attack, each one will get 5 dice. The French have 10 dice, 9 dice from the 1 battalion that's in the village, 1 battalion that's supporting it outside, and I don't think the square can throw itself in because the square can't provide support. So let's roll for the French first. They only cause 3 casualties. Now let's roll for the Dutch Belgians. Wow, that's pretty good, and I've got another 5 dice to go as well. Wow, what a roll. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 casualties against those French battalions, and the Dutch regain the village. And then finally for the turn, the Brunswick cavalry will charge home against this unformed French column. So they get 6 dice and the French get 4. Let's see how we do. Okay, so the French cause 2 casualties. The Hussars cause 4 casualties, so the Hussars win by 2. All right, let's do a recap of where we are at the end of turn 10. So we have the French down here in square, faced off against this large unit of Dutch-Belgian Hussars. They do have these Lancers, and there's just a lack of space to deploy them, so they're pretty safe, but the Dutch-Belgians now have their 2 Orange Nassau battalions here, supported by their horse artillery battery, which they've now brought up, which will cause damage against those squares, so that doesn't look great. In the centre here, we do have the other half of the brigade, which is all pretty fresh, very few casualties. It's now approaching the Nassau line that's lining this hedgerow. See whether they might be able to do something there. So we move across to the centre. We've got this French brigade, again, very fresh, just moving on. It's being held in check by the Brunswick cavalry for most of the game. And now the Brunswick cavalry have started to unleash themselves against this brigade that was attacking the village. These ones have taken a hammering this turn. Those 2 battalions at the back are retreating, having been thrown out the village. There was another battalion there just by that French square that the Brunswick Hussars have destroyed. And these other 2 battalions here are in the square to protect themselves. So we may be able to do some damage with that French artillery on the hill this turn, this upcoming turn, but it's not looking good for the French. And obviously in the centre, we now have the 27th Dutch Jaegers in possession of the village, alongside those Brunswickers who are still hanging in there. So we've lost one Brunswick brigade, but we're and haven't lost yet any French brigades, but I've got a feeling a couple are about to go in this next turn. Right, let's roll for initiative in turn 11. All right, let's roll the Fulter test for this French brigade. They roll a 6, they obey orders. That's at least some relief. All right, that's it. The French are at -2 and the Brunswickers are actually at -2. Both Brunswick infantry brigades are hesitant this turn. So let's see who's got initiative as we roll for this next turn. The French finally regain initiative in turn 11. Is it too late? So we've got a defensive volley against the attacking French here from the Nassau, who are in that wood line. And we roll an 8. So that'll be a standard volley. An 8 is 3 casualties against the attacking French column. And we'll now do a charge result as that column moves in. Okay, so this will be a charge result at -3 for the French. Prussian Nassau roll a 9, 10, 11, 12, so they win that by 3, and that column won't charge home. Okay, so here we are at the end of turn 11. The Dutch-Belgian artillery is starting to punish these squares, and this right-hand attack has faltered and fallen back. This attack in the centre is still stymied. The Brunswick Hussars are pretty much a spent force. They've now taken 10, 12, 13 casualties, I think, from a combination of those squares, the columns that are next to it, some skirmisher fire. When they were up against that hedge line, the artillery on the hill is now targeting them. So they really need to pull out, but there's not an easy way for them to withdraw. But the line along the hedgerow there looks stable. The Dutch still have 4 battalions of Dutch militia backing up the village, and they now own the right flank. Okay, let's just do turn 12, and then we'll probably call it. In turn 12, true to form, the Brunswick Hussars have charged again against this French column. They've charged again against this column in the centre with their all hands, and the French have charged against the Nassau. All right, let's see how these charges go. Firstly, this French column will try and form square, as the Hussars were more than 7 inches away. They can form square, so they will be all right, and the Hussars will almost certainly bounce off. All right, let's roll the results for this charge. Okay. All right, 9 for the Brunswickers, 4 for the French, but the Brunswickers are on -2, -3, so 7. So they only win by 3 or 4, and they will have to fall back and take a casualty. All right, we'll now do a defensive volley by this French column as it's charged by the... Well, that's quite good. That's an 11. That's pretty good. That will be at half effect, but that will cause some consternation amongst those all-hand lancers. Okay, so that's a discipline test on the all-hand lancers, which they fail, so they go unformed. So the lancers will be testing at -3. They go down to 5. The French are on 5, so the all-hand lancers take a casualty and will be forced to fall back. And then finally, the Nassau will do a defensive volley. That's pretty good. That's going to stop this attack. That's 10, a roll of 10. There we go. Against this attacking French. Right. That will now be a test at -3 on this charge. Yep, the French go to -1. The Nassau have won by 5. Okay, and we're going to call the game here. Be interested in your views. I think I'm going to call it a victory for the Allies. So this French brigade down here is in pretty much untouched state. Well, untouched, very light casualties. That one's taken 5 casualties. This one's taken 5, but the other 4 battalions are pretty much untouched. And we still have that Lancer unit in reserve. But against them, we have all the Nassau and the Dutch-Belgian cavalry. So pretty much an even fight there. French troops are slightly better quality and still pretty much untouched, but the Dutch still have a good strong position. In the centre, things are starting to go the French's way. So the the Brunswicker cavalry, which has proved such a obstacle from that opening charge onwards when it drove the Lancers off the table, who should have probably beaten it, given that they were better quality and outnumbered them. with their 2 regiments of lancers. The fact that they drove those lancers off the table on the first turn was an astute move, as it pinned all the columns down here. So these 3 columns of veteran French troops are now moving up into position to be able to assault the village. But again, as I said before, we have a complete Dutch-Belgian brigade in reserve behind the village. And that's probably the last of the French attacking potential. There are another 3 battalions of this brigade off table that I can move on. So we could have one more go at trying to assault the village, but it's far from a foregone conclusion and will take several turns to struggle to get those forces into position. This right-hand French brigade is pretty much ruined. 12 casualties and actually destroyed. That unit down there, 6 casualties, 10 casualties, 3 casualties. So, and that square up front, 4 casualties but pinned, although I guess it can come out of square now, but taking fire from the village. Over here we still have the French artillery, which is in support, that's useful, but they are now under severe threat as the Brunswickers are starting to push forward, and you can see the horse artillery itself has now gone. The French had to retire and leave the table because of the number of casualties they'd taken from these Brunswick skirmishers that had reached the trees by the edge of the artillery battery, and also the fire that was now coming up from this hedge line. So the Brunswickers over here, which have 2 undamaged battalion and 1 very weak battalion in play, can swing round, certainly pin this French brigade in place. So the French will probably have a chance of capturing the village, given that that attacking brigade has now probably got a free run against it. But far from certain whether they'll get in, and they'll certainly take plenty of casualties doing it. And the Dutch have hung on for 12 turns, and I think that length of resistance, which will probably extend at least another 2, 3, 4 turns, gives the French a bloody nose and allows the Duke of Brunswick to claim a tactical victory and certainly a good delaying action on the forces of Napoleon. I hope you've enjoyed this game. Do subscribe, give us any comments, and hope you enjoy this, and I'll pop a couple of other little videos about my painting that I'm up to at the moment. Alright, cheers everyone, see you soon.